We are presently at Daniel, we're about to start Daniel chapter 7. And just to remind us that there are 4 prophetic visions in the book of Daniel, 4 of them. Chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, and the last one goes from chapter 11 to 12. In between you have historical stories like Daniel in the lion's den, the 3 Hebrew children cast into the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar being made mad for 7 years. But even these stories, they are a part of God's effort to help us to understand the events that will take place at the end of time. So the entire book of Daniel is a pattern of the end. That's what we have been really trying to emphasize. So anyway, the last chapter, week before last, we looked at Daniel's experience being thrown into the den of lions, and one of the remarkable things that we could see is the way that God worked with these heathen kings. I count that remarkable because I understand that these were some of the most brutal, yeah, I can think about the adjectives. They were some of the most brutal people in existence, you know. But what I remember is that they lived in a brutal time. Things that people did in those days, I mean, you can't measure or judge by our standards today. And even God himself, sometimes God operated in ways that seem to be similar. For example, when God told Saul to slaughter the Amalekites, including all their animals, and not to allow anything to live. Or we can think of where God ordered the Israelites to stone the man that was picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. So the point I'm making is that it was a brutal time, and there are some of the things that happened then that we find a little difficult to understand. But God is dealing with people on the level of where they are, and he's working with the system that was in existence at the time, and we have to remember this. So Nebuchadnezzar, Darius, they appear to be brutal people, hard, but we look and we see that God was working in their lives. God worked to bring Nebuchadnezzar to the place where he praised and extolled the God of heaven, and we believe he actually ended up as a worshiper of Yahweh. And there's a lot to make us believe that probably with Darius it was the same thing. Now this week we come to Daniel chapter 7, which is the second prophetic chapter in the book of Daniel. So let's go to the Bible, and we will just start reading from chapter 7. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told us some of the matters. But Akip, I saw your hand go momentarily. Was that intentional?
No, it was accident.
Okay. All right, so this is the second vision in the book of Daniel, and we are now at chapter 7. So between chapter 2 and chapter 7, 3, 4, 5, 6, those are not prophetics. They don't deal with prophecies. But as I said, they have important information to give us concerning the end of time. Now, also we should note that this is the first vision that Daniel has in the book. The one in chapter 2, remember, was King Nebuchadnezzar's vision. It was not Daniel's vision. So now we come to Daniel's vision. When did Daniel have this vision? It goes back at least to chapter 5, because in chapter 5 Belshazzar was king. It goes back before chapter 5. So it was the first year of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon. So Daniel had a dream, and he wrote down the dream. In verse 2, Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea. So what he sees is that there is a battle taking place. There's a striving or a war that is taking place. And it's taking place between who? It's taking place between the four winds of the heaven. They are fighting together. And where are they fighting? They are fighting upon the great sea. He sees a great sea, four winds above the sea, and the winds are fighting. That's what he sees in his dream. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Out of this conflict that is taking place among these winds, four animals come up. So since we are doing a verse by verse study of the book of Daniel, I'm going to take the time to look up the meaning of these symbols, even though I'm aware that probably everybody in the room, you know the symbolism, you know what the symbols mean. But we will look it up anyway, because we are going through verse by verse, and there may be some people who are watching these videos who are not as familiar with these prophecies as we are. So first of all, I'm going to look at the great sea. What might it mean? And in Revelation 17. Now, I'm jumping all the way over to Revelation 17 because as I've tried to point out, Daniel and Revelation are companion books. They are related to each other. They are connected to each other more closely than they are connected to any other book in the Bible. They are the same kind of book. I mean, the theologians refer to them as apocalyptic prophecies. And I think it means that they are like hidden prophecies. They are like symbolic representational prophecies. But if you notice that both of them have similar kind of language, similar kind of images, both of them talk about beasts, and they use numbers and riddles and symbols. So they are very similar, but they are connected to each other, and therefore you will find explanations for Daniel in the book of Revelation, and you'll find explanations for Revelation in the book of Daniel. They are connected in this way. So we go to Revelation 17, and when you come down to about verse 15, you get a clue where it says, the angel says to John, it says, and he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So this is probably the chief verse that is used to make the point that water in the books of Daniel and Revelation usually mean multitudes of people, nations of people, different languages. So God himself gives the meaning of water. And we could see this applied in many places. For example, in Revelation chapter 13, it says, John says, I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. And the sea here representing multitudes of people, myriads of people. So when you come back to Daniel 7, on the left panel, it says the four winds are fighting together upon the great sea. It says they strove, the winds strove. Now, what do winds represent? Again, I want to take the time to look it up so we can be settled that this is what the Bible teaches. There are several places. Here's one of them, Jeremiah 49. God says, 49 verses 35 and 36, thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might, and upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and I will scatter them toward all those winds, and there shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come. So when God says, I will scatter them, I will bring the four winds, I will bring the four winds upon Elam, what God is talking about is some great disaster that will come upon will come upon Elam. Let me see if I can find another place. Right, probably. Let me go back to Jeremiah. I know there are some of them here. Jeremiah 4 and verse 13. No, Jeremiah 23. All right, here's one. Behold, a whirlwind of the Lord is gone forth in fury, even a grievous whirlwind. It shall fall grievously upon the head of the wicked. Now, there are some better ones. Here's one. Jeremiah 25, verse 32. Here, this one explains better what four winds represent. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coast of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be dung upon the ground. This is probably one of the best verses for demonstrating what winds signify. Because God tells us clearly that a great whirlwind, a swirling wind will be raised up. And when that happens, dead people are going to be on the earth from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. So, whirlwind represents a great time of trouble in which many people die. So wind in general represents trouble. But specifically, the four winds fighting together is what it says in the book of Daniel. Let's go back there. Yeah. Okay. So when Daniel sees the four winds of the heaven fighting upon the great sea, what he sees is is trouble among the nations. And out of this trouble, four great animals come up from the sea, different from one another. Now I want to emphasize this point. I would like us to understand this point. What God is showing us here is that in this world, nations come to power through conflict and war. Right? So it is four animals, and most of us understand these four animals represent four great kingdoms. We will see that a little later on. But these kingdoms come into prominence by war and conflict. That's how they gain their power, war and conflict. So God represents the fact that God represents that war and conflict as the winds of heaven are fighting together. And as they are fighting together, there's conflict among the nations. Different nations come into prominence, one behind the other. That's what this means. Now, let me just go quickly down to verse 17. I want to go to verse 17 because verse 17 helps us to understand what these animals represent. Like I said, I'm looking at the proof because I want us to understand that the Bible interprets itself. So in verse 17, same Daniel 7, I have it in the right panel. Daniel 7, verse 17. It says, these great beasts, which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. So even though in the vision, these animals are said to come out of the sea, but God explains to Daniel that they are actually kingdoms which arise in earth. They arise out of the earth. They are earthly kingdoms, and they are not actually coming out of a literal sea. So you know the sea is figurative. So it says there are four kings. Now in our day, when we talk about kings, a king, we tend to mean a single individual. But many times in the Bible, when it talks about a king, God is really referring to a dynasty of kings or to a kingdom. Right? God addresses his message to a king, but he's really speaking to the kingdom in particular. The king is the head, the king is a representative, but he's talking about the entire kingdom. And we see that here because if you go over to verse 23, we just look at verse 17, right? These great beasts are four kings. And if you look down at verse 23, look at what it says. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth. So, as I said, the Bible interprets itself. These beasts represent four kings or four kingdoms. Four kingdoms. Now, I'm going to modify that a little and say something else. I'm going to say it and later on I will demonstrate it. I'm going to say that these are not just kingdoms. These are empires. These are four empires. Now, in the Bible, in Bible times, I don't think there was a difference between kingdom and empire. So God never used any term other than the term kingdom. In our day, there is a distinction because a kingdom is a country, a government, an entity by itself. But an empire is a kingdom that rules over other kingdoms, right? You have like, for example, when you had the British Empire, England was the chief kingdom, but they had control over the Caribbean islands, over India, over Australia, and I think at one time they even had control over China, Hong Kong. At one time they were even in charge of the United States of America, the American colonies, and if I'm not mistaken, probably Canada too. So England was a major empire. And when we say empire, we mean it's not just one kingdom, not just one country. It has many countries under its dominion. So there's a reason why I'm making this point, and when we come to the place, I will explain why. But the point I'm making is that these animals that are represented here in the book of Daniel, we are looking at empires. It's important that we understand this. So, it says, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked up, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet of a man, as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So, here is an illustration of this first. I mean, whenever we look at these illustrations, it's always going to come short because nobody can really represent adequately what God showed to Daniel in vision. But the main thing we see here that it was a lion and it had eagle's wings. Now the Lord says about it that it had, or the vision says, after a while, the wings were taken from it. That's one. It was made to stand upon the feet like a man. That's two. And thirdly, a man's heart was given to it. So if we try to look at this in depth, I mean, there may be different interpretations. Give me just a second here. I'm getting a little... Sorry about that. Right, so when it says the wings were plucked, it gives us we see that the wings were not just decoration on this lion. God gave the lion these wings because he wanted to represent something. Let me see if I can find, if we go to Exodus, look at the right panel, I'm going to go to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus 19. And verse 4. Look at what God says. You have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bear you on eagle's wings, and brought you unto myself. It seems to me that when God protects and when God oversees the development of a country, of a people, God represents it as having carried them on eagle's wings. So when God directed Israel to leave Egypt, and when God protected Israel on the way and preserved them from disaster and brought them to the place where they were now under God's control, God represents it as carrying them on eagle's wings. Just based on this verse alone, I would say that the eagle's wings on this lion, he had eagle's wings. The eagle's wings represented the fact that God was the one who was leading and directing the kingdom of Babylon. Now, if this sounds a little bit strange, the Bible says it in many places in the Old Testament. Many places God said that Nebuchadnezzar was his instrument that he was going to use to punish the nations. God told the Israelites that they were not to fight against the Babylonians. He told them that they were to submit to Nebuchadnezzar. They didn't obey, of course. They didn't obey. And they suffered greatly because of refusing to do what God said. But God told them to submit to Nebuchadnezzar. God told them that Nebuchadnezzar was his servant that he was going to use to do several things. And I think we can see this in the fact that this lion has eagle's wings. Now, before I go any further with that, I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself, and I need to go and make that good. All right. So this is what I should have said first of all. Actually, I'm looking at the wrong picture. Give me just a moment. I need to go back to something we looked at previously. Okay. Right, I wanted to go back to this image here. All right, this is what I wanted. Now, what we saw, what we are looking at here is the image of Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, we will remember that in his dream, Nebuchadnezzar had an image, he saw an image that was made up of 4 parts. The head of gold, the breast and the arms of silver, the belly and the thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the same legs of iron, changing a little bit to become the feet of iron and clay. And maybe, this part of the image is the same part, everything here, but only that it undergoes a change. It shows you, the vision showed you that it goes through a change. So, we went through Daniel 2 and we saw that this image represented 4 great empires: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then Rome divided up, same Rome but divided up. And we have already seen, in looking at the scripture, we have seen in the historical part of the book of Daniel how Babylon was overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. And we are now, even in the prophecy, we are at the second kingdom, Medo-Persia. And where we are in the book of Daniel, the Greeks are still to come, and Rome is still to come. But the point is, God told Nebuchadnezzar, and now he tells Daniel again, that there are to be these 4 great empires: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. 4 great empires that were to rule the world. from the time of Daniel until the end of time. Now, when I'm looking at this, there's something that I want to say. I mean, as I studied these prophecies over and over for many years, one thing that was in the back of my mind was, what about America? America is probably, undoubtedly, America is greater in power today than any of those four empires were. And then what about places like China, which is another dominant global power? Why is it that we say that these were four empires that would rule the world, when we can see that they never really ruled the world, because the world as it is today was not known in biblical times? The greatest powers of all were not yet even in existence. So why does God emphasize these four kingdoms as though they were the greatest thing ever? And I've come to the conclusion that the reason is because these are the great kingdoms of the biblical world. The Bible world centers around Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. That is the world of the Bible. Sometimes you have a little reference to China. I think it is called the land of Sinim. Land of Sinim. Vague references to a place like China. But generally speaking, the Bible is about the world of the Bible. That was what was then known as the civilized world. But the point is that in that part of the world, these were the great empires. Since that time, the world as it was then was dominated by the empire of Rome. It was the greatest military power in the entire planet. Even if you wanted to put America in it, nobody knew about America or Australia. But even if you put them in it, there was no power that was stronger than Rome. Rome was the greatest military power on the planet. And so it was with the other three as well. So when the Bible says that these great kingdoms will rule the world, they rule the world as it was known at that time. They did rule the world. They did control the world that was known at that time. So what about today? Somebody will say, well, are we not in the prophecy? But the truth is that we don't appear in those four empires, because these are the four empires that shaped the history of the world. By the time you come down to the end, to where Rome has changed into the feet of iron and clay, other powers come on the scene. Other powers. But the point is, God doesn't give us the details of those other powers until we get to places like Revelation, the book of Revelation. So in the book of Revelation now, we begin to see greater insight into what happened with that last empire. That's a lot of what Revelation is about. But we should remember that. So it's not that the Bible distorts history. It's that the Bible is concerned with biblical history. Okay? The history that is related to the biblical world and to the people who are involved in Christianity. That's what the Bible is concerned about most of all. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. So we saw that according to Daniel chapter 2, if you are going to talk about four kingdoms, these are the four that you're going to look at. So Daniel chapter 2 gives us the template, and we know that where we are looking at kingdoms, major kingdoms or empires in the prophecies, these are the four that we are going to be looking at. We're not going to look at anything else, because the Bible, God, through Jesus, through the angel, he did emphasize that these are the four. These are the four that will last until the end of time. There's not going to be any other empire to rule the world. With all due respect to China and America and Russia, there's not going to be any empire to rule the world after Rome. Rome was the last one. You will still have great powers, but even today we can see that these powers are not empires, right? There's no empire that dominates the world. I mean, America was in the ascendancy for many years, but it never ruled the world, right? Okay, I'm sorry. It never ruled the world. There were many other countries, and there still are many other countries that are equally or almost equally dominant. America was never in control of Russia, China, Korea, Australia. I mean, they were allies, but it was never an empire, as Rome was an empire. So the Bible says that the last great empire would be the Roman Empire. So, I'm making that point because now you come to, let me go back to my former chart. You come to this vision where Daniel sees these 4 animals coming up out of the sea. And the first one is like a lion, and you know that this has to be Babylon, because in the book of Daniel, the first of the great empires is Babylon. So, you know what is interesting? I don't know how many of us are aware of this, but I think I should have prepared I should have gotten a picture to show you. Let me see if I can bring up the internet and see if I can find it. If I find it, I'll show you the picture. I find it interesting that in Babylon, okay, I'm sure you can see some of the images on the screen. What I typed in was winged lion and Babylon. This is one of the, it says this is a winged lion of Babylon. It's at the Louvre Museum in Paris. This is one of the known representations of the Empire of Babylon, a lion with wings. So that is very interesting because in the prophecy, God clearly says that the thing that he was looking at, the thing that Daniel saw coming up, the first empire was a lion which had eagle's wings. And as I said, this is one of the clear symbols of Babylon. So God used a symbol that represented Babylon. But the second thing about it, and I believe that this is the most important, is that it also represented God's protection and God's guidance. Now, I believe this is the main meaning of those wings, and I'll show you why. Because look at what it says next. I beheld till the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So, what this suggests to me is that whatever the wings represent, it's taken away. And what is it that was taken away? God's protection and God's use of Babylon as his tool, that came to an end. At the beginning, when Babylon came into prominence, God was protecting Babylon. God was using Babylon. He was using Babylon to punish the nations and to be a tool for punishing apostate Israel. But afterwards, and maybe this is after the time of Nebuchadnezzar, because in Nebuchadnezzar's time, you can see that God was still working with Nebuchadnezzar. But after this, the wings are taken away. God's protection is gone. It is lifted up from the earth and made to stand upon the feet as a man. So what does this say? It says Babylon is now operating in human wisdom and human power. The driving force behind Babylon is now humanity. And a man's heart was given to it. And if you think of the difference between the heart of a man and the heart of a lion, then the difference is obvious. A man's heart represents something that is inherently timid, and you might say not every man, but the difference between a man's heart and a lion's heart, when somebody is really brave, we say he has a lion's heart. Okay, so the idea is the contrast between very brave, very capable in warfare as opposed to the heart of a man. It's the difference between Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom and Belshazzar's kingdom. Usually at the beginning of a great empire, it's aggressive, it has strong leaders, it's moving forward confidently. And when it is ready to die, it becomes very effeminate and uncertain, and it has become very weak socially and governmentally. And we can see that with Belshazzar, who was a shadow of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. And you know, just not to get too political, but you have seen it. I guess that's why a lot of people are concerned about the direction that their country goes, even America, because you know, you have a time when the country is moving in a way of principle and strength. Then it comes to a time when it is moving on the basis of human whim and human petulance and human emotionalism, and the people who lead it have become weak, and you know, they are easily controlled and dominated. And very often that happens just before the empire collapses. So that's what God is telling us about Babylon. It collapsed. It was ready to collapse because it no longer had eagle's wings, and it was changed from the heart of a lion to the heart of a man. Now in verse 5 it says, "And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh." So this second beast, of course, would represent the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, naturally, because the next kingdom that followed Babylon was Medo-Persia. Now we get a little bit more information about this beast a little further on in the chapter. Let me see where it says it. The thing is that when you go down further in chapter 7, it gives you more information. Where is it? Okay, it's right here in the same verse. I'm looking for something that is in the verse itself, because it says it raised up itself on one side. But there's also a verse that says the higher one came up last. I don't know if anybody can find that verse for me. I know there's such a verse, but I can't find it at the moment. Let me see if I can look for it.
Daniel 8:3.
It's 8:3?
Yeah.
I'm confusing the 2 chapters. Thank you, Sister Elizabeth. I'm confusing the 2 chapters. Okay, this is talking about the ram that had 2 horns. So I'm confusing myself. Thank you for that. Okay, so actually what we're seeing here is that the bear raised itself upon one side, and I was confusing it with the horns. All right, so let's ignore the horns in chapter 8 until we come to that, right? So why does it say the bear raised up itself on one side? I mean, God is giving us some details that are very, very significant, little things that we would normally overlook. But what does he, why do we get this detail? Remember last week or the week before, I was making the point that it was, week before last, I was making the point that Medo-Persia was made up of 2 kingdoms. It was the Medes and the Persians. Now, the greater kingdom was the Persians. They were the stronger kingdom. But the Medes were led by Darius, who was the uncle of the Persian king. The Persian king was Cyrus, and he was an outstanding king. I think they call him Cyrus the Great. But Cyrus was the head of the Persians. Medo-Persia was a lesser kingdom, but it was led by Darius. And Darius was the uncle of Cyrus. So both kingdoms conquered Babylon, both of them working together. They merged and they were called Medo-Persia. We refer to them as Medo-Persia. But the first king was Darius because Cyrus, out of respect for his uncle, allowed Darius to be the first king. So that's that story. And that explains why God says that the bear raised itself upon one side. There are two sides to the bear, right? Medo-Persia and Persia and Media and Persia. But one side was stronger, and that is why God represents it here in the prophecy. Every detail is taken care of, so we don't need to be too confused. Now it says it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And I can only tell you what historians say, because I don't know the truth of it. But they say that when Medo-Persia was coming into prominence, was taking over the empire, there were 3 provinces that suffered terribly under the Medo-Persians. They were supposed to be a rapacious set of people. There's a verse in the Bible that describes them. I don't remember the key words to look for, but it describes them as being a rapacious people whose eye shall not pity. Let me see if I can find that. No, that's not the one I'm looking for. But I'll find it some other time. But it says of the Medes and the Persians that they were rapacious is the word. Yeah, maybe there's some other word that I could use, but they were terrible people, merciless. And these 3 provinces suffered terribly under their hand. There was Babylon, that was one, and of course Babylon was the empire they overthrew. So Babylon was one of the provinces. You know, within Babylon, within the empire of Babylon, you had the province of Babylon and the city of Babylon. It's like in Jamaica, we have 14 parishes. One parish is called Kingston, and every parish has a capital. So Manchester, where I live, the capital is Mandeville. But in the city of Kingston, in the parish of Kingston, the capital of Kingston is Kingston, is the city of Kingston. So it was something like that with Babylon. You had the empire of Babylon, the country of Babylon, and you had the city of Babylon. So the province of Babylon suffered terribly at the hand of the Medes and the Persians. Babylon, and also the country of Lydia and the country of Egypt. That's what the historians say. They say that these 3 provinces were terribly ravaged by the Medo-Persians. And if you notice, God highlights the terrible nature of the Medo-Persian Empire, because there's a voice that says to the bear, "Arise, devour much flesh." So that statement is just put in there by God to give us an idea of the kind of nature of this second empire. Then you come to verse 6 and it says, "After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it." Now, the Bible, our God, keeps changing his information. We need to keep be on our toes. This 4th beast looks like a leopard, another familiar animal, but like with all of them, this one it has some little things wrong with it, or strange about it. This one has 4 heads, and it also has 4 wings. Now it says it has the wings of a fowl, but I think we could be misled there, because in our thinking, a fowl is a kind of domestic bird that we sometimes refer to as chickens, right? But in the biblical terminology, a fowl just simply means a flying animal, right? If you go back to the book of Genesis, where it talks about God creating the animals, on day 5 it says, or day 4, it says God made fowls, right? It says in verse 21, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. So a fowl in the biblical terminology simply means a kind of animal that flies, right? A kind of animal that has wings. We might not even call them animals today, but it simply means a creature, a flesh and blood creature that has wings. So when it says the wings of a fowl, it doesn't mean necessarily a chicken like we understand. So what kind of wings did this animal have? I'm not sure. The lion is said to have eagle's wings. This one, this one also has wings. And instead of having 2 wings like the lion, this one has 4 wings. So we do a little speculation here, because we know that in the case of the lion, eagle's wings were specified, and eagle's wings represent God's care and protection, God's guidance and direction when it moved. So here it says wings, but it doesn't say eagle's wings. So we look at the empire that it represents, and we can pick up a few things. Now, the empire that it represents, of course, is the empire of Greece, the Grecian Empire. And what we know about this empire is that it was, let's say, founded. It was established by a man that is called Alexander the Great. Now, they call him great, not because he was great in spiritual ways, but they call him great because in the world he was considered great, because he was an outstanding military general. It is said, history records, that in 5 years he took over the entire empire. He became well, they thought it was the world back then. He became king of the world in 5 years. And in those days they had no tanks and vehicles, no bombs, no planes. Everything was done on foot with horses, chariots, and foot. And so for somebody to conquer the world, that empire that existed there, it was a massive feat to do it in 5 years. And somebody says Isaiah 13 verse 18. I don't know if that is talking about the Medes and Persians. Let me look at it quickly. Isaiah 13 verse 18. Yeah, this is the one I had in mind. God says, behold, I will stir up the Medes against them. He's talking about against Babylon, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold they shall not delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eye shall not spare children. There's another verse. Let me see if I can find another one quickly, since we're looking at this. It's going to take too much time to go through all of this, so I will leave that. Yeah, thank you for this verse. This is a good one.
What does the verse say that you're trying to find?
If I could remember the exact words, I would be able to find it.
Just
But it talks about the violent, the vicious nature of the Medes, and it says something similar to this, but it actually words it a little differently. So I can't give you the key word because I can't remember it at the moment. But anyway, as I was saying, the let's look at the symbols here that are on this third animal. So the question is, what would these wings represent then? Because they are not specified to be eagle's wings. Maybe they could have been, but I think if they were, Daniel would have mentioned it. But it says the wings of a fowl, which means that they are the wings of a bird. And so I will suggest here, and this is something that is not original, this is what I learned, but it makes sense to me that these wings represent the speed with which the Greek kingdom moved in conquering the world. Not 2 wings, but 4 wings, because it moved rapidly. It was the fastest moving kingdom in terms of its conquest of the previous empire, which was the Medo-Persian Empire. And God represents this beast, this empire, as having 4 heads. Now, some of the details are not given to us in chapter 7 here, but when you go over to chapter 8, you see the same Greece empire again, and we get some insight. What we understand is that the first king was Alexander the Great, but after Alexander died, his empire was divided into 4. You know, he had 4 lieutenants or 4 generals. 4 generals who were leaders of his army. And after he died, because he had no heir, like happens often in many of these worldly kingdoms, everything fell apart, right? Some of them made war against one another, and they began to fight with one another. And Greece ended up having 4 divisions. Now, just as a matter of interest, the names of these 4 generals who took over were Cassander, Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Seleucus. Just as a matter of interest. And this is represented, God represents it in this vision as the leopard having 4 heads. So I want to emphasize that God is taking care of every little detail so that we don't have any problem in identifying the identity of these kings or these kingdoms. Because remember in Daniel chapter 2 we saw the vision of the great image, but there is no explanation as to tell us the names of these kingdoms. The only one we have is Babylon, because Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold, and after you will arise another kingdom." And okay, we know that the next kingdom was Medo-Persia, because we saw what happened in the time of Belshazzar when the Medes took the kingdom. But the other kingdoms, Greece and Rome, we don't have names for them yet. So God is giving us details so we can know what it's going to be like. Because at this time when Daniel is having this vision, remember it's from way back in the first year of Belshazzar, Babylon was still ruling. So God tells him that this kingdom number 3 will have 4 heads. So we know hundreds of years before Greece came to power, if you read the book of Daniel, you would have known that Greece would be split up into 4 divisions. So these details are very helpful for us to, you know, the book of Daniel is so strikingly accurate that I understand that the Jews, they forbid, I don't know if they still do, I know they forbid, I think they still do, they forbid their people to try to calculate the times in the book of Daniel, because those times point with great precision to the coming of the Messiah. And I know that a lot of skeptics, they make the claim that the book of Daniel was written long after the time of Daniel, after these prophecies actually took place, because of course a skeptic will not accept, an atheist will not accept that these prophecies were made before these events happened. But I mean, those nonsensical ideas cannot be supported. Jesus lived in the time of the Roman Empire, and Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, even in the time of Jesus, Daniel The name of Daniel and the prophecies of Daniel were well known. But long before that, as we read sometime in the past, in the book of Jeremiah, in the book of Ezekiel, God says, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in the land, they would deliver only themselves by their righteousness. So God already, from the time of Ezekiel, from the time that the book of Ezekiel was written, Daniel was already recognized as an outstanding child of God, as a prophet. So the ideas of the skeptics and the atheists, it's pure nonsensical foolishness. It's like the atheist will say, or the evolutionist will say, we don't know how the world came into existence. We can't explain it, but we know it can't be God, because God does not exist. I mean, the stupidity of it is mind-boggling. I was reading an article this week. Somebody posted it in one of the chats, but I was reading this article, and it's of course it's a secular article, and it says that the mystery now that is growing upon scientists, quote unquote, it's growing on these scientists, is the mystery of how life could have started. What they are trying to do now is to calculate mathematically what are the odds that life could have started by chance. It's a strange thing to me that they are just looking at it from the point of view of maths, but I find that a lot of these people in their science and their studies, they are very locked into their little box. Like, for example, if you're a mathematician, the only thing you know is maths. If you're a biologist, the only thing you know is biology. If you're an archaeologist, all you know is archaeology. Now, somebody like me is at an advantage because I look at everything, because I'm not any of these things. But because of this, I am kind of understanding a little bit the way the mind of an atheistic scientist works. Some of the simplest proofs that you will see never occurred to them. Never occurred to them. Because their minds are not trained or conditioned to look at things from that perspective. It's an amazing thing. It's incredible that it could be this way, but it is actually this way. And what I'm saying is, when you look at the question of the origin of life, okay, they say, let's look at it from maths, okay. The mathematics is effectively impossible. Impossible. Here's what somebody said about the possibility of life forming by chance. Now, on the head of a pin, you can have probably billions of atoms on the head of a pin. Now, they say for life to take place by chance, there's one atom in the universe that is marked, not on the head of the pin, not in my town, not on my body, not in the country of Jamaica, not in this planet, but there's one atom in the universe that is marked. It has a mark on it. The odds of life happening by chance is for you to accidentally hit upon that one marked atom in the entire universe. Those are the odds, mathematically, that life could have taken place by chance. So, it's numbers that are why bother to even think about something like that? It's impossible 1,000 times over. But the thing is, you know what they said? After they think about it, they say possibly life could have originated. They're not throwing out the idea that life could have originated from panspermia. What is panspermia? Panspermia is the idea that aliens came to this earth and released sperm, released seed, and that is how life started here. There are no words to describe that kind of stupidity. Because, not only is it abysmally stupid, but it simply pushes the problem a little further back. Because if you say aliens came to this world, you have to ask, where did the aliens come from? Right? They prefer to believe in aliens than to believe in God. And if you say aliens, yes, there are aliens. It's called God and the angels. It's called God and the angels. That's the only kind of aliens that there are. But I look at these people who are supposed to be smart and learned, and I say, God saved me. Thank God I was saved from education. Anyway, but why am I ranting like this? I'm ranting a little bit because I don't even know why. I don't even remember what I was saying. But anyway, God gave us this information, right? And I was saying that these so-called learned people, they want to say that it could not have happened in the time of Daniel, because surely nobody can tell the future. Nobody can see the future. So of course it could not have been that Daniel was around back in those days. It must have been written after. They make their conclusion and then they try to make the facts fit their conclusion, instead of looking at the facts which are so clear. These are prophecies that God gave before these events took place. Now, we're going to just look at the fourth beast, and then we'll probably stop here for the evening. And then next week we're going to have the pleasure of beginning to interpret the details of this vision. So it says, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. Now this beast has no name. There's no description of this beast because God, I don't know, maybe, no, there's no such beast. God invents an animal. And it is because the nature of this empire is so terrible, God cannot compare it to any known animal. God invents an animal. He says it had great iron teeth. It devoured it, it ate everything, and it broke in pieces, and it stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was not content to simply destroy, but after it destroyed, it trampled what was left behind. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, clearly, this is empire number 4, and as we know, empire number 4, history tells us that this was the Roman Empire. And the description here makes us know that although all of these empires were terrible, Medo-Persia was said to have no pity. But Rome was the worst. Rome was the worst. We know that they used to crucify people. And I am told that our history records that during the time of the siege of Jerusalem, they crucified people, set up crosses outside the city, and crucified people so thick that it was difficult to walk between them. And crucifixion was a peculiarly terrible kind of death, because what they would do, they would nail you up, and the process of dying usually took several days. You hung there, beaten by the elements, in addition to the terrible pain you are feeling in your hands and in your feet while your organs are collapsing. Everything is going, and you're simply left there to die. And I suppose, I don't know if it was just Jesus, I think normally they stripped you of your clothing as well. So you were that's why we know that Jesus was not simply killed by the pain of the crucifixion. That's not the right understanding of the suffering he went through. His suffering was spiritual and mental, because he was separated from God. That was a real suffering. That's what killed him. Something far worse than the pain of crucifixion. But that was the way the Romans were. They devised exquisite ways to crush those who opposed them, and to make sure that people feared them like the devil. So nobody would ever rebel against them. And you know that they were highly efficient and highly successful in what they did, because they became the longest lasting empire. Now it says that this one was different from the others. One of the things was that it had 10 horns. Now, I should have a better illustration than this, but let me use this one for the timing. This one doesn't look very fearsome at all. But anyway, great iron teeth, claws of brass, and it has 10 horns on the head of it. Next week I'll have something better. But it says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So of course, this one is different from the others. The others were simply animals. This one is strange. It's like a combination of beast and man. Plus this one has iron teeth. It has claws of brass, and it is behaving, it's not content to destroy, it tramples and crushes. And then it has 10 horns. And this is one of the things that I wanted to emphasize. This is one of the reasons why I say that these beasts represent not kingdoms, but empires. Empires, because what does the horn represent? What does the horn represent? Well, again, we're going to take a look at the book of Revelation, just to try to decipher what these horns might represent. And when you go to the book of Revelation, you see where it says in chapter 17, Revelation 17, it says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And as we have seen, kings represent kingdoms. Kings represent kingdoms. So this is why we make a distinction that the 10 horns, that the beast represent empires, because clearly upon this empire, Rome for example, there are 10 smaller kingdoms which are represented by these 10 horns. These represent smaller kingdoms. So on this empire called Rome, this empire, it's made up of 10 smaller kingdoms. It's governed by 10 kingdoms. And Daniel is watching, and something strange is happening among these horns. And I have an illustration here. Now he sees upon the head of this beast there are 10 horns, but if you look at this one, you'll see 5. And the reason for this is because this one in the front, this big one with the mouth and the eyes, that one came up after the 10. There were 10 that came up first, and then this one came up. And while it was coming up, it uprooted 3 of the other horns. And it became more dominant, and it began to speak with the voice of a man, and it had the eyes of a man. So this represents what Daniel saw. This is a vision that he saw. Now, what does it mean? Well, like I said, I'm going to wait until next week to go into that part of it. We're going to stop on verse 8 because my voice is gravelly and I think I need to give it a rest. So I'm going to stop on that note for this evening, but I'm going to pause before we actually end the meeting to ask if there is any question anybody wants to ask or any point that anybody wants to make. Brother Kip, go ahead.
Last month, Trump made an executive order to make DC beautiful again, and he wants them to do it by uh, he specifically promotes Greco-Roman style architecture, which Trump praised for evoking tradition and civic pride.
Hmm. Interesting. So he thinks a part of making BC beautiful again is to restore Roman architecture, to promote Roman architecture. Okay. Thanks, Brother Kip. It may
Yeah,
mean nothing and it may mean a lot. I know that the culture and the architecture of Rome and Greece are highly admired by the people who control the world. So it's interesting.
yeah.
Go ahead, Brother
The
Andrew.
point that he made it, the point that he made it an executive order was uh, kind of what got me a little bit.
Strange, strange, strange. Yeah, you're commanding that this become policy, that this style of architecture should be. It's interesting. Brother Andrew, go ahead.
Yes, good evening. While you were doing your presentation, my mind went to the fact that I think it was this week, or even if it's not this week, it's within this short space of time that they have instituted that the Department of Defense in the U.S. should become the Department of War. So ever since World War II, I believe, the particular portfolio responsible for national security was known as the Department of Defense. But Trump and his cabinet have determined that it should be known as the Department of War. I mean, that in itself suggests a particular posture
Mhm.
in the world and in keeping with the times that we're living in. At the same time as this is happening, we go over to Europe and we see that Europe is militarizing like never before. And I would dare say, you, I mean, I think I know based on the number of times that you've repeated it that you're in your 70s. I would say not in your lifetime, apart from World War II, has one seen, and this is something that I challenge anyone to refute, Europe saber rattling, and particularly Germany. Germany was particularly um, to cut a long story short, significant limits were placed upon the militarization of Europe by the United States and by the countries around it, particularly France, because of what Germany would have done to France during World War II. But Germany has begun militarizing and began embracing a particular military posture in the face of Germany. And before I've spoken of how it is, according to the Monnet method, Edward Monnet, Jean Monnet rather, said that Europe will be forged in crisis. And after every major crisis, it has been used as a means to catapult Europe. Yes, there are forces within Europe that are anti the European Union. Such forces manifested themselves in Brexit. But this so-called Russian threat, and I say so-called because, I mean, these people use things as pretext. However it came about, the reality of it is that it is causing Europe to be galvanized towards war, along with Britain, which was supposedly have Brexited. But Britain is standing by Europe in their push to to make guarantees to Ukraine. And I'm coming to a close. It was reported several times recently, I think from Thursday onwards, Macron, who came to power, I think he's been in power for almost 10 years now, as a pro-European thinker. speaking about the need to put Europe back in its rightful place. My brother Kip spoke about Trump and his order regarding Greco-Roman architecture. Macron is an unabashed fan of Napoleon. So you have these figures who have a keen sense of history and a keen sense of invoking the imperial aspects of history. And as you presented, I think several presentations, the two pals, Europe and the beast from the earth, are manifesting like never before the will to go back on the warpath again. And everything is lining up. I paused, but Macron had said that the hospitals in France should get ready for a war within the next 6 months. So nobody knows what the future holds. I mean, when I saw it, I thought it was a joke, but I checked. It was in the BBC. It was Canal V, the official news arm of France. All of them were indeed quoting him. It was a memo that was imparted by the Élysée, the French, the official residence of the French president, said, yes, we need to get our hospitals mobilized for within the next 6 months, war. So,
Yeah.
finally, the final thing, when we're coming up in the Adventist church, we used to sing this song by F.E. Belden, Look for the Waymarks, the great prophetic waymarks. Then we'd sing Down Through the Ages, and it talk about the four. And I recall it ending with, where are we now? We really need to recognize, and it is timely that we're doing these prophetic seminars because we're living in the very toenail of time.
I have to admit that I'm keeping an eye on the developments that are taking place in the conflict between Russia, Ukraine, and the way, as you said, the rest of Europe is posturing. And some of the pronouncements that are being made and some of the ignorance, I avoid very much discussing politics because I'm saying if me and any of my brethren are to fight, let us fight over spiritual matters, but let's not fight over politics. So I avoid politics because I know how volatile it can be. Even in Jamaica here, they just had their election on Wednesday, and I keep my mouth quiet because I don't want to get into war with any of my brethren. I see some of my brethren almost knocking fists over JLP and PNP. If I'm going to fight you, it will be for a cause worth fighting for. But I keep abreast of what's going on in the political world because I feel that it will have some impact on how the prophetic landscape develops. And I think, yes, I have a greater awareness of the urgency of the times when I look at Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and the pronouncements by the European leaders. Something seems imminent, as crazy as it seems, but something seems imminent. So, just before Sister Esther speaks, I want to say the thing that is highlighted in my mind when I think about it. I know that all that matters to God is that our relationship with Him should be strong. That's all that matters. In the beginning, we lost our relationship. When we come to the end of the story and to the end of the road, it says we will live in the temple. We will be made pillars in the temple. Our relationship is sealed and cemented. This is God's dream, God's goal, God's purpose. And so, in everything that is happening, from Eden to Eden, with all little incidents in between, from the fall of man, and in my own journey, I was looking at it and I'm seeing, come to the truth about God, come to the truth about the two Adams, come to the truth about the covenants, come to the truth about the kingdom, the truth about the judgment of the kingdoms, and step by step, and I realize it's all a part of the great landscape that we come back to God, to the place where we ought to be. Everything else is just a step to that greatest place of all. So it's good to keep this in mind, because there's a lot of distractions out there, a lot of things that want to drag us in one direction or the other. Keep our eyes on these things, but don't forget what they are supposed to do for us. Not to get us involved, but to make us understand our need to cling to the Rock of Ages. Sister Esther, go ahead.
Jesus said that we would hear of wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. Is there any kind of a clue to let us know when the end is?
Well, absolutely there are clues, because Jesus says, when these things begin to come to pass, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. So, he was, both, all of these quotations are coming from Matthew chapter 24. Some of Mark 13, Luke 21, and Luke 17, which are all a part of the same great sermon, different representations of it. So, when Jesus says, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, see, the end is not yet. You have to look at, if we look at the whole chapter, we can see that it takes us through a sequence of events. Now, when he said the end is not yet, he was speaking about before the destruction of Jerusalem. So the first part of the chapter takes us from where the disciples are with Jesus until the destruction of Jerusalem. And before Jerusalem was destroyed, that's where he said, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. So they heard of wars and rumors of wars because the Romans were coming against Jerusalem. They came and they pulled back and came back 3 years later. So there were many upheavals in the Roman Empire with wars and rumors of wars. And Jesus was telling them, when you see these things, it is not yet the end. But then he comes down now to the next phase of it, where he says, and there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. Now he comes down to the last moments. And that's where he begins to tell us now that because iniquity shall abound, the love of many will grow cold. And it's in this part that he tells us that when these signs begin to come to pass, look up, lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near. So there are definitely signs, Sister Esther.
Thank you.